Researchers in 1983 discovered something not just groundbreaking, but so counterintuitive that despite being one of the most replicated findings in the social sciences, it's still largely ignored today in schools, workplaces, and in relationships. Rewards aren't just unhelpful, they actually destroy our motivation. But how is it that such a large discovery could be made without anything changing at all? Kids are still getting pizza points for reading, we all dole out praise to one another constantly, and so much of it seems so innocuous until you start reading this study and this one and this one and then another 50, and then suddenly it all seems totally bizarre. I mean, it's a bit weird that nothing changed, right? It's important to clarify, I don't believe in productivity for the sake of productivity or that kids and people are somehow soft or coddled by rewards. My issue isn't that rewards are given out to some people that people deem are unworthy of rewarding, but with the coercive use of rewards that winds up distorting our relationships and reduces human interactions to transactions. But there are real things that we can do to change this, to rescue our intrinsic motivation. And I'm going to share the changes that I've made to my own life after years of studying this. To start, I want to propose a thought experiment to you for a moment. Imagine that you notice your neighbor forgot to take out his trash to the curb. Maybe he's out of town. You see the overflowing trash bin, the garbage truck down the street, it's on its way. And so you run over to the trash, you pull it to the curb, the trash gets picked up, and you feel really good. For a lot of people, myself included, this obvious opportunity to help another person might be the best moment in their whole day. You might go home after this and think, like, yes, I am like living in alignment with the person I want to be just from this trash experience. But the next day, he comes by, and along with a thank you, he pulls out his wallet, looks through it, and hands you $5. Yeah. Researchers have investigated the same situation. And if you're pissed off just thinking about this or feel like your neighbor was maybe missing the point, you are like most people. Yes, social and economic realms, they have different expectations. But there's also something corrosive to intrinsic motivation when we receive an extrinsic reward. And I think the knee-jerk reaction preserves that. When I first started making this video, I thought kind of the interesting story here was, how is it that such a well-replicated study, something that should greatly influence how we organize our entire social lives, how is it that it didn't change anything? That this could be true and we do nothing with that? That was such an interesting question to me. And it made me, I think it caused me to ignore for a moment that this video could also be an opportunity to demonstrate just how effective the removal of rewards can be, that there was another way to go about this. So I'm trying to do both in this video, and I'm hoping I can kind of thread the needle. I remember arriving at school, first day, eyes wide open with excitement, taking in this kaleidoscopic world filled with possibilities. I eagerly drew cats, triangle cats, and started to write, more or less in the right order, the letters that would make up my name. If we're lucky, we're allowed to have a few years like this, just freely exploring the world. But it's not just us in the world. There's other people too. And they have expectations for how we should act, what's right, what's wrong, and what being productive should look like. And something interesting happens to us along the way. We learn that if we do good things, the things that we're supposed to do, that actual good things that we want happen to us. And when we do bad things, even if we really like the bad things that we don't like happen to us. In the 20th century, there emerged this popular psychological theory called behaviorism, that it was possible to deeply influence the behavior of a person by controlling their inputs, and that the primary inputs to control were rewards and punishments. Business executives, teachers, managers, parents went wild with behaviorism. And it's from this theory that we received the concept of a Skinner box, named after psychologist B.F. Skinner. Animals in a Skinner box learn to perform actions, like pressing a lever in exchange for a compelling reward, like food or water. It makes sense, right? Over time, the constant chase for praise, status, financial rewards winds up diminishing the genuine enjoyment and connection that social media can offer us. And it leads to this cycle of dependency where users feel compelled to engage more and more frequently, not for personal satisfaction, but for the next potential dopamine hit from an uncertain reward. And just as a rat may be pressing a lever repeatedly without knowing whether or not it will get food, users too are refreshing their feeds, not knowing if they're going to see a new like, a new comment. This uncertainty is intentional. It increases engagement. It triggers compulsive behaviors in people, just like we see in gamblers, actions that become seemingly impossible to resist. But we're clever and we really want the reward. So we started figuring out how to get the praise, the gold star, the slice of pizza, sadly, too often a hug. Our own participation winds up better representing the fastest and easiest path toward that reward. That's what it maps, rather than any kind of self-driven self-discovery, play, or exploration. And we learn that if we read easier, shorter books, that will get more points. So that's exactly what we do. We optimize and configure ourselves entirely around the reward. This structure of doing this to get that, that's what we learn. That is the lesson we learn. And we learn that we too can utilize it to influence other people. But should we? In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche suggests that what we consider as moral phenomena are mere interpretations shaped by the prevailing ideologies and power structures. And if they aren't moral truths, that means we can ask, are they really serving us best? The problem didn't start with Skinner, right? We see this concept of good rewarding good and bad punishing bad throughout most world religions, philosophies, moral aphorisms. Hard work should be rewarded. Good people should get good things. I want to disclose something. I'm a bit biased here. Even if rewards worked, I still think that the coercive relationship modeled would encourage at most minimal use of them. And people might treat them more like they treat punishment. But when we look at the studies, whether it's evaluating children getting rewards for coloring, asking high schoolers to consider the praise they might get for doing a really good job, or praising kids for engaging in pro-social acts like sharing, kindness, rewards in every case reduce creativity, reduce enjoyment, and reduce the amount of time spent on these tasks. I've linked down in the description below to a document with dozens of these studies, and I'll continue to add to it as I come across and read more. So then why do we use rewards? This diagram right here. It has to do with memory and effect. At the beginning of a stimuli, like receiving a reward, we remember things pretty clearly. This is also the period where rewards do appear to work, right at the start. We might do the thing we're avoiding, we might start exercising or study extra hard for a test. But as the effect drops off, so does our memory. And by the time we're fully experiencing the negative side effects, we stop exercising, we drop a class, we've temporally disconnected the initial cause, a reward, and instead think we've just lost interest. We weren't good enough, that somehow we personally failed and are a failure. Rewards, just like punishment, can produce temporary compliance. They do work if they're in the right amounts, but in a limited sense. But if we consider if we really want to learn something, if we really want to gain a habit, I think the question we have to ask is, would we still do the thing without the reward? Would we continue to do it if rewarded at the same rate? And if the reward suddenly stopped, how would that affect our performance? The evidence is that we don't continue it at the same rate or as creatively, but somehow it's even worse than that. Even when disclosed to participants in studies that rewarding behavior makes them perform worse, they still have completely unchanged beliefs about rewards and their effectiveness, which might suggest that no matter how I make the case to you here, you might leave unchanged. But I'm hopeful because I think that there is something, bear with me here, else at play while you're watching this video. I think it's that you decided to watch it, that something in you got to this point right here with some amount of curiosity and thought, okay, let's like hear him out on the case. I'm not sure if I agree or not. I want to evaluate this. You weren't coerced in a study. You weren't rewarded for watching. You weren't praised by anyone. And I'll be like extra careful not to thank you at the end. So maybe that difference will matter. But I might thank you if you do join my Patreon. As I mentioned in my last video about turning my life into a game, each video that I release now is a game that you too can play, whether you join or not. It's totally free. You can take a look at the video for how and why it is I'm doing that. Patrons, though, also do gain access to zines that I mail to you, special videos that I post there, and also have the ability to decide what videos I make, the experiments I run. And I randomly mail people weird nightmarish machines that they can haunt themselves awake with. So check it out. Okay, briefly, a common objection, our intuition, is that there is some way that we could use rewards, right? To get the routine or the behavior started at that initial point where it works, or maybe they work better with activities that we're already intrinsically motivated to do. Aren't two kinds of motivation better than one? Unfortunately, this is where rewards seem to corrupt our motivation the most, because it's where there is actual motivation to corrupt. It may be excusable in some cases to use rewards for tasks that we otherwise wouldn't work on if the task is really essential and there isn't any intrinsic motivation to erode. But we should look for alternatives. And for alternatives, I think we need to understand what it is we're talking about when we say intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. This binary of intrinsic versus extrinsic is kind of limiting because what we're really talking about is what regulates our behavior and why does it regulate it. And there's not just one kind of external regulation. I should also clarify what I mean by rewards, punishment, and praise. One of the alternative frameworks that emerged in the wake of behaviorism was put forward by Edward Deci, one of the most prolific researchers on rewards and their complicated effects on motivation. It's called self-determination theory, and it offers us a map for shifting motivation from predominantly external to more and more internalized, which can then lead to self-direction, curiosity, and intentionality in life. We can think of regulation as a spectrum starting at the most externalized form, aptly named externally regulated behavior. Externally regulated behavior would be like if you're at work, just slogging through mind-numbing tasks just so you don't get fired, or maybe you would find yourself taking a class that's completely meaningless to you, but you need to pass it to get a degree that you actually care about. Here, your actions are directly chained to external demands, not personal fulfillment. As we move toward the intrinsic and internal regulation, we have the second category that Deci identified called introjected regulation of behavior. Introjected regulation is where the motivation is still extrinsic, but now it's starting to internalize. Our actions are taken maybe to avoid guilt, anxiety, or to enhance our own ego with things like pride. For example, studying for an exam might make you feel a certain sense of pride, or maybe you'd be avoiding a feeling of guilt for not studying. Although it's more internalized, it's still not fully autonomous because it's driven by external pressures rather than our own personal values. Next, we have the third form, which is called identified regulation. This is where you recognize an activity's worth and engage in it willingly, even if it's not something you really want to do. You might call it a should. Consider exercising for health because you should, you know that you should, rather than enjoyment because you want to or because you get to. The overall pursuit might be valued, even if the activity or behavior itself isn't. Integrated regulation is maybe the most autonomous form of extrinsic motivation. Here, your behaviors are fully assimilated with other aspects of yourself and your values and personality. Although the actions are for extrinsic reasons still, they're totally coherent with your identity and beliefs, making them often feel internally quite voluntary. So if you were a musician, you might practice every day, not solely for the enjoyment or the pleasure of practicing, but because music itself is a core part of your identity and it relates to your own life goals. You might consider yourself as a musician, and to you, this is what a musician does. This is what being a musician means. Intrinsic motivation, which you might be guessing just from what hasn't been described here, comes into play when the actions themselves are reason enough. So sticking with the idea of music, you might just love playing piano without any focus on external validation, success, meeting the performance standards of other people, gaining recognition. The joy derived from these activities is it's spontaneous, it's emergent, it's self-sustaining, and we'd still do it even if there was little chance of success. Deci also identified 3 key components of the makeup of intrinsically motivated activities, what they have in common. The first is autonomy, the feeling that activities are self-chosen, they're self-endorsed. When we choose to engage in an activity out of free will, without feeling pressured or coerced, rewarded, we can play with these activities almost effortlessly, even if the activity itself is still difficult or challenging. The second is competence, and we can think of competence as a sense of mastery and effectiveness in the tasks that we do undertake. When we feel competent, we're much more likely to engage deeply and continuously in an activity. And positive feedback on tasks, these enhance our feelings of competence. They increase intrinsic motivation, as long as that feedback doesn't feel too controlling or coercive like a grade might. Relatedness relates to our innate need to feel connected with others. Activities that help us feel a sense of belonging or attachment to a group or larger community, these really enhance intrinsic motivation. And this can be why hobbies or interests that involve a social component like team sport, like basketball, soccer, or book club, these can be particularly engaging. All right, now back to rewards. By rewards, I mean the incentives we give in response to an action or behavior intended to reinforce that behavior. Praise also is commonly given out. And by praise, what I mean is a compliment, some kind of public recognition, really anything intended not just to give feedback on the behavior or the task, but also intended to influence the person receiving it to continue a behavior. Praise is so difficult to remove from our lives, I think, because it feels so good to give and receive it, like any reward. It often seems innocuous. I'm just telling someone good job. And so many of our social interactions are mediated by the exchange of praise. It's an easy way to signal openness to connection, desire, and acceptance. And last, punishment. Rewards and punishments can seem so different, but when we think of punishment as any negative consequence intended to reduce a behavior, they start to look a lot closer. And punishments could be like fines, penalties, a reprimand, a loss of a privilege, or even the withholding of a reward. From the perspective of someone not receiving a reward, it is pretty hard to distinguish that from punishment. So many of us, I think rightfully so, don't advocate for the use of punishment, especially in childhood, but quietly we offer punishment daily to each other in less truthful or obvious ways. One of the critical insights from DC's research is called the over-justification effect. And this is kind of the machinery at play underneath rewards. This occurs when external incentives like reward or praise are starting to undermine intrinsic motivation. When we receive rewards or praise for an activity that we already find intrinsically motivating, our internal desire to engage in that activity can start to diminish. This happens because the reward shifts our perception of why we're doing the activity to begin with. And we begin to associate this activity now with the external prize. When rewards and praise are expected, the locus of control, the degree to which we believe we influence the events in our lives, starts to shift from the internal to the external. This is key. There are a few competing theories as to why this is. DC offers something called cognitive evaluation theory, which I kind of like. It posits that the effects of external rewards on intrinsic motivation depend on how those rewards are perceived in terms of autonomy and competence. So with autonomy, if the rewards or praise are perceived as controlling, attempting to influence us, they start to undermine our sense of autonomy, which erodes our intrinsic motivation. And with competence, rewards and praise that enhance our sense of competence, like good feedback, can increase intrinsic motivation, provided they're not perceived as controlling. Positive feedback makes us feel capable and effective. It can really bolster intrinsic motivation, intrinsic drive, to have us continue to engage in an activity as we see ourselves improving. To move past extrinsic motivation, rewards, punishment, we need to wholeheartedly pursue designing a life that really matters for us. I have been working on a video that I'll link here once it's finished, but I did want to give you a few parts of it right now. Working with other people on complicated, difficult tasks tends to be fun when we have choices, opportunities to learn new skills, variety in what we work on, and the ability to demonstrate real competence. These should be things where you feel like you're really making a difference, solving a real problem that you care about. And just like entering a flow state, work should be at this level of difficulty where it's hard, but accomplishable. There's no one solution for this. Higher wages, benefits, status, rewards, none of them help. What we need to do is discover opportunities to work on what we find important on our own, where we can connect our own daily, weekly, and yearly work toward a real problem that we're curious about, toward an unanswered question that we hold. And I think we can reverse engineer this from our past. That's what I've done. You can think back to what you've worked on throughout your whole life, the largest questions that you've pursued, your earliest memories. What was engaging to you? What did you lose 6 hours doing? What left you feeling really energized after? What would you do if you knew that no matter what, you would succeed? What would you still want to work on? What would you still want to work on if you had no chance at all of success? What are the questions that keep coming up for you, that linger in your mind? take these questions seriously. Life, I think, can look many ways beyond how we've structured it in this world. No matter where you are in life right now, it's worth finding a way to live in the present moment, in this moment right now, that's enjoyable as journey, enjoyable as discovery. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if success will come or status or if you'll finish the project. I think it is always worth it to find a way to enjoy the present. I encourage you to experiment with imagining different jobs. Pretend for a day that your identity is that of someone drastically different, that you can enter the role. Pretend that you're walking around as an architect, as an actor who just finished a performance, an animator. What matters to you? See what it feels like to wear the identity. Is there a way to enter that life more? And I think talking to people who already share that identity, who already wear it on a daily basis, can be really helpful. And when you talk to them, I don't think you need to ask them for advice or for a job or for any recommendations. I think it's about just saturating your own understanding with what problems they face, what their day looks like, what it feels like to be them. Burnout often doesn't just come from the amount of work we do, but it can come from misalignment, from how we feel about that work, whether it is in alignment with our values and whether we have real choices over how we pursue it, absent rewards. With sensitivity and without the numbing agent of rewards, we can start to feel this dissatisfaction clearly, and we can use that dissatisfaction to really find autonomy, to find new kinds of work, new kinds of living. How to motivate people, I think, is the wrong question. We don't need more motivation. We come into the world with endless motivation, and we're so hungry for learning and exploration. When our environment suits us, when we feel safe, when we can really pursue what we're doing and focus on the craft itself, the real benefits that it might have to someone else, I think our motivation just feels unlimited. So much focus is placed on if something works, if rewards work, if punishment works. But isn't there an underlying assumption to be investigated still? One that has maybe sat unexamined in front of us, sort of invisibly inherited, that even if rewards did work, should we use them? The deeper issue is, I think, the very structure of how we relate to other humans, how we utilize them. And while rewards do seem most commonly used in places where they increase power asymmetries, which is, teacher, student, parent, child, employer, excess use value to be employee, they're not neutral when given out to yourself either. And within an IFS framework, an internal family systems framework, where you start thinking of yourself maybe as a community, a family of parts, they may be creating internal conflict, internal resistance, resentment, and disempowerment. It may seem like a vacation or a nice job is far removed from assembling a social panopticon, but I think the very illusion of distance between those is the very reason to think seriously about that connection. How easy it is to intervene with a reward, how little investment or connection or curiosity it requires, what might actually be going on. Compelling rewards, just like punishment, render autonomy absolutely impossible. It's questionable, I think, whether people should really get what they deserve. But if you do, like most people believe in the equity principle universally, rewards rob us of the opportunity to do something better, I think, to teach, to learn about ourselves, and to connect. They numb our sensitivity and our instinct for the truth. We learn not to pay attention to boredom, not to pay attention to dissatisfaction, but to numb it with rewards or the promise of more distractions in the future. The way out is to focus on what we're doing, the craft we're practicing, the learning itself, to enjoy the process. When we focus less on ourselves, what we might get or not get, if we're progressing quickly or slowly, when we can ignore just for one moment how well we're doing compared to other people, we start to discover something new. It may seem counterintuitive, but the less we think about performance, the more we're able to take on difficult tasks. If we don't care about how we'll be seen to others, how failure might feel, I think we might avoid it a little bit less. If you enjoyed this video, maybe I can entice you over to my Patreon, where you can join for free. You can receive zines that I mail to you, exclusive videos that I only post there, 12-hour live streams where I wake up at 4 a.m. And there's a virtual version of the board game I use to play my life that you can play also and control every decision that I make, sort of. Anyway, check it out.